My wife started forgetting small things about 2 years ago. Not dramatic things, just the little ones that slip past you if you're not paying attention. She put the car keys in the freezer. Call our neighbor by the wrong name, a woman she'd known for 11 years. When she left a pot of soup boiling on the stove for so long, the water burned off completely, and the smell of scorched metal filled the whole house. I'd tell myself it was stress. She was 61. We'd been through a lot. People forget things, but somewhere around last March, I stopped being able to tell myself that. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I'm 67, a retired high school history teacher from Knoxville, Tennessee. My wife Beverly taught piano lessons out of our house for 30 years. She had this way of remembering every single student she'd ever taught. Their names, their favorite songs, whether they were nervous or confident, whether they needed a stern word or a gentle one. Her memory was who she was. When it started going, something essential went with it. Our son Kyle had moved back home 2 years before that. He was 36, in between jobs after a tech startup he'd co-founded fell apart. The company had owed him equity that never materialized. He'd sunk his savings into it. When it collapsed, he came back to Knoxville with 2 suitcases and the kind of quiet shame that sits behind a man's eyes and doesn't leave. I was glad to have him home at first. Beverly's decline gave me an excuse to feel useful about it. Kyle stepped in as her daytime caregiver while I still did the occasional consulting work for the county school district. He scheduled her doctor's appointments. He managed her medications. He drove her to her Tuesday hair appointments and her Thursday Bible study group. He was patient with her, gentle. That's what made it so hard later. I keep coming back to the afternoon I drove Beverly to see Dr. Raymond Shue, her new neurologist at University of Tennessee Medical Center. It was a rainy Wednesday in September. Beverly had insisted on wearing her yellow raincoat, the one she'd had since before we got married, even though it was 30 years old and slightly too small for her now. She sat in the passenger seat, humming something I couldn't quite place. I remember watching her from the corner of my eye and thinking, she seems calm today, more herself. I should have noticed sooner what that meant. Dr. Chu was thorough, mid-50s, very still in the way that precise people sometimes are, like they don't waste movement. He'd reviewed Beverly's records from her previous neurologist and ordered a full cognitive assessment. Beverly sat across from him and answered his questions with increasing confusion. "What season is it?" she said summer. It was September. He asked her to count backward from 100 by sevens. She got to 86 and stopped, looked at her hands like they might have the answer. Kyle had stepped out to use the restroom. He'd been gone maybe 3 minutes. Dr. Chu looked at the closed door, then back at me. His voice dropped. "Mr. Whitmore, I need to ask you something before your son comes back. Who fills your wife's weekly medication organizer?" "Kyle does," I said. "He's been doing it since June." Something crossed his face. He leaned forward. "I've been looking at her decline rate against her previous neurologist's notes from 18 months ago. This is not typical progression. The pattern is inconsistent with early-stage Alzheimer's. It looks more like someone who is being sedated regularly." He paused. "I've seen this before. Certain central nervous system depressants, particularly benzodiazepines, can mimic dementia almost perfectly in older patients. They cause genuine cognitive impairment, but it can be reversible." I stared at him. "Are you telling me?" The door handle turned. Kyle came back in, drying his hands on his jeans, smiling at Beverly. "How's it going, Mom? Doc treating you right?" Dr. Chu straightened in his chair. His expression returned to professional neutral in the span of a breath. "We're just finishing up. I'd like to order some additional blood work, Mrs. Hinn. Whitmore, if that's all right." The drive home I didn't say a word. I watched Kyle from the rearview mirror more than I watched the road. He was texting. I noticed his phone screen was tilted away from me at an angle. A small thing. I'd never thought about it before. Beverly fell asleep in the passenger seat before we reached the highway. That night, I sat in the dark in my study for a long time. Kyle had always been the steady one. His sister Renee lived in Portland now, called on birthdays and holidays, sent cards, but Kyle had come home. Kyle had stayed. Kyle had volunteered to manage everything medical because he said he wanted to help. I had leaned on that. I had been grateful. I thought about the financial conversations. They'd started maybe 8 months earlier, quiet and reasonable at first. Dad, you and Mom should think about updating the estate documents. You're not getting younger. What happens to this house if something happens to you both? I need to make sure I can make decisions quickly if there's a medical crisis. He brought me a stack of printed documents from an estate attorney's website. Power of attorney forms. Advanced directive paperwork. I'd signed some of it. Not all. I kept putting the rest off. I thought about how he'd pushed me to take the Claiborne County School District consulting contract last fall. 6 weeks. Good money. He said he'd handle everything with Beverly. You deserve to keep working, Dad, while you still can. I'd gone. Beverly had worsened significantly that fall. I thought about his debt. He'd told me the full amount in February over coffee at the kitchen table. Borrowed money from 3 people he couldn't pay back. Maxed credit cards. Something about a second investor who'd threatened to sue. I'm in over my head, Dad. I don't know how I'm going to climb out. I had offered a loan then, $50,000. He'd refused. Said he'd figure it out himself. Our house on Laurel Ridge Road was appraised at $640,000 the previous spring. Beverly's retirement account had another $200,000. I had my own pension. Together, we were asset-rich in a way that hadn't meant much to me before that night. Sitting in my dark study, it started to mean something different. I went to bed but didn't sleep. The next morning, I drove to the library on Broadway when Kyle was still upstairs with Beverly helping her get ready. I told him I needed to pick up a book I'd reserved. He barely looked up from the medication organizer he was filling. He was separating small tablets into the weekly compartments with a careful, practiced routine. The library opened at 9. I knew the reference librarian, Agnes Tate, a quiet woman in her 60s who'd helped me pull archive material for school projects more than once. I didn't tell her what I was looking for or why. I just used the database terminals myself. I searched for benzodiazepine toxicity in elderly patients. I searched for drug-induced dementia symptoms. I searched for how long cognitive symptoms persist after cessation. What I found made me sit very still for a long time. The symptoms matched Beverly's progression almost exactly. The timeline matched. Early confusion, worsening over months, some days notably worse than others, which I'd attributed to the disease being unpredictable. The research described dose-dependent cognitive impairment, increased sedation, memory disruption. It described how elderly patients were particularly vulnerable to even low doses, and it described, this is the part I stared at the longest, documented cases of deliberate sedation of elderly relatives, usually by family members seeking financial control. There was a phrase one study used, caregiver-induced incapacity. I'd never heard those words together before. I wished I still hadn't. I drove home and did nothing to indicate anything had changed. That afternoon, while Kyle was watching television, I went upstairs to Beverly's bathroom and found her prescription bottles on the shelf above the sink. I knew what she was prescribed. I'd been present for every doctor's visit for 30 years. Blood pressure medication, a low-dose thyroid pill, a vitamin D supplement. There were 4 bottles. The 4th one I didn't recognize. No pharmacy label, a plain amber bottle with a strip of white masking tape. Someone had written on the tape in small letters, clonazepam 0.5 milligrams, 2 pills daily. I picked it up carefully with a handkerchief. I set it in my jacket pocket. I researched clonazepam that evening on my phone with the door locked. It was a prescription benzodiazepine, used legitimately for anxiety and seizure disorders. In someone Beverly's age and size, regular doses would cause exactly what Dr. Chu had described: sedation, memory disruption, confusion. Over months, over years, I sat on the edge of the bed and felt something I hadn't felt since Beverly's decline began. Not grief, not helplessness, but a cold and specific anger. I called my neighbor Frank Bellamy the next morning. Frank was 74, retired Knox County Sheriff's deputy, and the kind of man who listens more than he talks. We'd been friends for 20 years. I walked over at 7 in the morning before Kyle was awake and told him everything. Frank listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. You keep that bottle exactly as it is, he said. You get your wife to the medical center today. Tell Dr. Chu what you found. And Jerry, don't tell Kyle anything. Don't change how you behave around him. Not yet. He's my son, Frank. I know he is. He looked at me steadily. Do it anyway. I took Beverly to see Dr. Chu that same afternoon while Kyle was at the grocery store. I told Beverly I wanted a second opinion on something, and that I'd appreciate her not mentioning it to Kyle just yet. I told her Kyle worried too much, and I didn't want to stress him. She accepted that easily. She'd always been protective of Kyle's feelings. Dr. Chu examined the bottle without touching it, using a pen to rotate it. His face didn't change, but his jaw tightened slightly. "This is a controlled substance," he said quietly. "Not in her prescriptions. Not from any pharmacy I can verify." He set it down carefully. "Mr. Pictions. Not from any pharmacy I can verify. Mr. Piction, Whitmore, I want to draw blood today. And I want to say plainly, what you're describing constitutes elder abuse under Tennessee law. If her blood shows what I think it will show, you'll need to contact law enforcement." I sat there and thought about teaching Kyle to ride a bicycle in the driveway of our first house. He must have been 6. He kept falling and he kept getting up, and he had the stubbornest expression on his face. Wouldn't ask for help, wouldn't quit. "Do the blood work," I said. I went home and acted normal. It was the hardest acting I'd ever done in my life. We ate dinner together that evening. The 3 of us. Kyle made spaghetti. Beverly ate slowly and seemed foggy. I watched Kyle fill her water glass and pass her the bread basket and tell her about a podcast he'd been listening to, something about American history that he thought I'd like. I nodded and asked questions and thought, is this the same person? Is this someone I raised? I didn't sleep again that night. Dr. Chu called me the next morning on my cell while Kyle was in the shower. He spoke quietly and precisely. Her blood shows elevated clonazepam levels consistent with regular long-term dosing. The concentration suggests approximately 0.5 milligram twice daily, consistent with the bottle you brought in. This level of benzodiazepine in a woman her age and weight would cause significant sedation and memory impairment. There is no medical reason for her to have been taking this. He paused. She wasn't losing her memory, Mr. Whitmore. She was being chemically sedated. I thanked him. I sat down on the back porch steps and stayed there until the cold got to my knees. I called Frank. Frank had already talked to a detective he knew at Knox County Sheriff's Office, a woman named Detective Patricia Gaines, 20 years on the job, who handled financial exploitation cases. Frank had described the situation in general terms. She was ready to talk. I drove to the sheriff's office alone. Detective Gaines was younger than I expected, early 40s, with a direct manner and no wasted words. I handed her the amber bottle in a sealed plastic bag. I gave her Dr. and CERM, Chu's contact information. I walked her through the financial timeline, the debt, the estate paperwork, the push for power of attorney, the consulting contract that had taken me away for 6 weeks. She listened to everything and made notes. "The medical evidence alone is strong," she said. "With the financial motive documented, we have enough to request a search warrant." She looked at me carefully. "Mr. Whitmore, I want to ask you something. Does your son have access to your wife's financial accounts?" I thought about it. Kyle had offered to help manage monthly bills while I was in Claiborne County. I'd given him limited access to one checking account. "Limited," I said. "I need to check." What I found that evening, sitting at our kitchen computer while Kyle drove Beverly to Bible study, was a checking account that had moved $43,000 in 11 months. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Amounts too large to be groceries or utilities, too regular to be random. The transfers had started in October, right after Beverly's most significant decline. Right after I'd signed the first power of attorney document. I printed the statements. My hands were very steady. I surprised myself at that. I sent Detective Gaines photographs of every page. She called me back within 2 hours. "We have enough," she said. "I'll have a warrant by tomorrow." I need to tell you about that night because it's the part I go back to most. Beverly and Kyle had come home from Bible study. Beverly was tired, a little more confused than usual. Kyle helped her into her recliner and turned on the television to the old movie channel she liked. He brought her a glass of warm milk. He tucked a blanket around her legs. His face when he looked at her was, and I've spent a long time trying to understand this, genuinely tender. Whatever he was doing, whatever justifications he had built in his own mind, in that moment, the way he looked at his mother was real. I watched from the doorway of the kitchen. I thought, I don't know you. I went to bed. I lay in the dark next to Beverly, who was sleeping quietly, and I listened to her breathing, and I thought about 36 years of her life that I knew. Every argument and every morning and every moment of grace between us. And I thought about the 2 years she had been disappearing, and how she'd told me once in one of her clearer moments, Gerald, I feel like I can't get to myself. Like I'm standing behind glass. I hadn't understood what she meant then. I understood it now. The next morning was cool and clear. A Thursday in late October. The trees on Laurel Ridge Road had turned, and the yard was full of red and yellow. Beverly was at the kitchen table with her crossword puzzle when Kyle came downstairs. He poured coffee. He was relaxed. He had no reason not to be. I was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table, or I looked like I was. At 8:15 there was a knock at the door. I answered it. Detective Gaines stood on the porch with 2 officers in plain clothes. A Knox County Sheriff's vehicle was parked at the curb. Kyle appeared in the hallway behind me, coffee mug still in hand. He saw the detective. He saw the officers. He looked at me. I had tried to imagine this moment many times in the previous 48 hours. What I thought I'd feel. What I thought he'd do. I wasn't prepared for the way his face changed. The coffee mug lowered slowly to his side, and his face went through several things very quickly. Confusion, recognition, and then something that looked like relief, which I didn't expect, and still don't entirely understand. Kyle Whitmore, Detective Gaines said, I have a warrant for your arrest for elder financial exploitation, criminal poisoning of a vulnerable adult, and financial fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Beverly had stood up from the table. She was standing in the kitchen doorway in her robe, holding her crossword pencil, watching them put handcuffs on her son. Gerald, she said. Her voice was very quiet. What is happening to my boy? I went to her. I put my arm around her. I didn't have anything to say that was enough. There's nothing enough for a moment like that. Kyle looked back at us as they walked him toward the door. He didn't look at me. He looked at Beverly. He said, I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. His voice broke on the last word, and I believed him. I believe him still, in the way that you can believe someone's regret and still need them held accountable for what they did. They took him in the patrol car. I stood on the porch and watched until it turned the corner. Frank came over 20 minutes later without being asked. He sat at our kitchen table and didn't say much, and that was exactly right. Over the next several weeks, Dr. Chu reduced Beverly's medications carefully, monitoring for withdrawal symptoms. Her recovery was not instant, and it was not simple. There were bad days in November when she was frightened and disoriented, and I didn't know if what I was seeing was the real aftermath of the clonazepam or something permanent underneath it. Those were the hardest days, but by late November she remembered the names of all 3 of her current piano students without prompting. In December she baked a pecan pie from memory, the recipe she'd made every Thanksgiving since 1987, and it was perfect. She cried a little after she tasted it. I thought I'd lost that, she said. I thought that was just gone. I didn't tell her right away why she'd gotten better. I waited until she was stronger, until her memory had been stable for several weeks. We sat together in the living room on a Sunday afternoon in January, and I told her everything. The whole story from beginning to end. She listened without interrupting. Her face was very still. When I finished, she sat quietly for a long time. Then she said, I remember feeling like I was shouting inside and nothing would come out, like there was a wall between me and everything I knew. I know. I want to visit him, she said. I know that too. Renee flew in from Portland when we told her. She didn't speak to Kyle for 3 months after the arrest. When she finally agreed to visit him at the detention facility, she came home that evening and sat in my armchair in the living room and stared at the wall for a long time. He said he didn't know how to ask for help, she told me finally. He said he thought if Mom got worse, gradually, you'd both want to sell the house and simplify things. He told himself he was just accelerating a process that was going to happen anyway. She looked at me. That is the most terrifying logic I've ever heard. It is. It is terrifying because it has a certain internal structure. He hadn't started from hatred. He hadn't started with the intention of genuinely harming her. He'd started from desperation and from the specific human capacity to build a story around what you want that explains why what you want is actually reasonable. The distance between that starting point and what he did to his mother across 2 years, that distance is what I find myself measuring, in quiet moments, still. His trial was 4 months later. Renee flew back for it. Beverly and I sat in the courtroom together, and I held her hand. The assistant district attorney, a serious young woman named Carol Ferris, laid out the evidence methodically. The unlabeled bottle, the blood tests, the bank transfers, the power of attorney documents signed during Beverly's most impaired period. Dr. Turney, Chu testified that Beverly had been deliberately sedated for an extended period and that the dosage had been calibrated to impair without causing obvious overdose symptoms. Kyle's defense attorney argued diminished capacity under extreme financial stress and characterized Kyle as a devoted caregiver who had made catastrophically poor decisions. There were moments during those arguments when I could see why a person might find them persuasive, and moments when I wanted to stand up and say something I would have regretted. Kyle took the stand. He spoke quietly and without theatrics. He confirmed the essential facts. He described his own thinking at the time in a way that I found both devastating and inadequate. I convinced myself she was going to end up in memory care anyway, he said. I convinced myself I was just managing things early. He paused. I know how that sounds now. The jury deliberated for a day and a half. They returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Judge Lawrence Pittman sentenced Kyle to 9 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 6. Full restitution of the misappropriated funds. A permanent order of no contact with Beverly without her explicit consent. Beverly wept through the sentencing. So did Renee. I didn't, which surprised me, and I'm still not sure what to make of it. I sat there and felt something settle, the way a long dislocated joint finally goes back where it belongs. It doesn't stop hurting. It just becomes the right kind of pain. That was 8 months ago. Beverly is teaching piano again. She started with one student in March, a 7-year-old named Felix who lives 2 streets over and shows, according to Beverly, genuine aptitude and absolutely no patience, which she says with the particular affection of someone who knows exactly what she's dealing with. By May, she had 4 students. She's thinking about taking on a 5th. Her memory is not perfect. There's still gaps from those 2 years, pieces she can't recover, conversations we apparently had that she doesn't recall, a stretch of the previous fall that is largely dark to her. Dr. Herr, Chu says some of that may be permanent. We don't know yet. We've decided to live with not knowing. I stopped doing consulting work. I'm here now, fully. Some mornings I sit at the kitchen table and listen to Beverly playing scales in the other room, and I think about how close I came to losing her in a way I didn't even understand I was losing her. Renee calls twice a week now. She flew in for Beverly's birthday in April, and the 3 of us went to Dollywood, which was Beverly's choice and which she described, on the drive home, as perfectly ridiculous in the best possible way. Kyle wrote me a letter from prison in June. 3 handwritten pages. I've read it many times. I haven't written back yet. I don't know what I want to say. I know I will write back eventually, because I am his father, and that is not a thing you stop being, no matter what. But I haven't found the words yet that are honest and not cruel, and also true about all of it at once. If you are watching this and you have an elderly parent whose mind seems to be slipping, I need you to look at who controls their medications. I need you to look at who controls their financial accounts. I need you to look at whether a single person has positioned themselves as the essential point of contact between your parent and the outside world. I need you to ask whether your parent has gotten worse specifically during periods when that person is most present. I am a retired history teacher. I know that the pattern I've described is not new. The exploitation of vulnerable people by those closest to them is as old as inheritance. But knowing that doesn't make it easier to recognize from inside it. I trusted my son because I loved my son. I told myself the signs were something else because I needed them to be something else. By the time I stopped telling myself that, 2 years were gone. Beverly is playing something now in the other room. I can hear her from where I am sitting. It's a piece I don't recognize. Something she's working on for one of the students, I think. She keeps stopping on one passage and going back, stopping and going back, working out something that isn't right yet. I could sit here and listen to that for the rest of my life. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, if something I described sounds like someone you love, please don't wait the way I waited. Talk to their doctor. Look at their medications. Trust what you're seeing when something feels wrong. And if you've ever had to look at someone you raised and see them clearly instead of the way you always wanted to see them, I'd like to know I'm not the only one. Tell me in the comments, wherever you're watching from, whatever time it is there. Tell me your story. I think it matters that we say these things out loud. Hit subscribe if you want to stay. There are more stories here. Not easy ones, but true ones. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to see someone clearly, especially someone you love. Not the version of them you raised, or hoped for, or needed them to be. The actual person standing in front of you, doing what they're doing. Kyle wasn't a stranger. He was someone I taught to drive. Someone I sat next to in the hospital the night his grandmother died. When he came home after the startup collapsed, I didn't see a threat. I saw my son, hurting and ashamed, and I wanted to help him. That instinct isn't wrong, but I let it blind me longer than I should have, and Beverly paid the cost of that blindness, not me. That's the part I sit with. The consequences of my choices landed on her. That's how it usually works. When we refuse to see something difficult, the damage rarely stays contained to us alone. It spreads to whoever is closest and least protected. Kyle made his choices, and they were his to make and his to answer for. But I made choices too. I signed documents I should have read more carefully. I took a 6-week contract that took me away from home when something in me already felt uneasy. I accepted the story that Beverly was simply aging because accepting that story was easier than considering the alternative. Every one of those decisions had a consequence I couldn't see at the time and couldn't undo after. That's what I mean when I say I believe in cause and effect. Not fate, not punishment handed down from somewhere above. Just the plain hard truth that what we choose to do or not do sets something in motion. Kyle's desperation, left unaddressed and turned inward, became deception. His deception, compounded over months, became a crime. My willingness to look away, compounded over months, became 2 years of Beverly standing behind glass, unable to reach herself. None of it was inevitable. Any number of small choices, made differently, could have changed the path. That's not comforting. It's actually harder than fate, because it means the responsibility was always real, always present, always ours. What I've learned, and I use that word carefully, because learning something at 67 after this much damage feels like a strange kind of gift, is that love without clear eyes isn't really protection. It feels like loyalty. It presents itself as kindness, but when we love someone so much that we can't afford to see what they're doing, we aren't protecting anyone. We're protecting our own need to believe in a version of them that no longer exists. Beverly is playing piano again. Kyle is in a prison cell in East Tennessee. Renee calls twice a week. I drink my coffee in the morning and listen to the scales coming from the other room, and I think, this is what survived. Not everything I wanted, not the family I thought we were, but this. Beverly's hands finding the right notes again, the light through the kitchen window, the particular ordinary grace of a Tuesday morning. This is what's left after you finally choose to see. That's enough. Some days it's more than enough, and I've decided that having enough and knowing it is its own kind of hard-won wisdom.